welcome to Theology Thursdays. Again, whatever day we get it posted. My name's Pastor Cara, and I am so glad you could join us this day. And
I'm Pastor Trudy, and I am also glad that you could join us on whatever time of day and whatever day you are watching this.
The wonders of the internet.
That. Yes.
So we are excited this morning to talk a little bit more about parables. The last 2 weeks we've talked about the parable of the sower and the parable of the weeds and the wheat. And today we've got a couple of more. So Trudy, you want to jump in?
Sure. Our readings come to us from Matthew chapter 13, and they're broken up into two sections. So there's verses 31 to 33, and then 44 through 50? 52?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you're reading that part. So I'll begin. You know when to stop. So let us begin with verse 31. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in the branches. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened.
The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then, in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous, and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all of this? They answered, yes. And he said to them, therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household, who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. Yay!
More parables!
We love parables.
They are confusing. I think the people lied to Jesus when they said that they understood this, because I don't get it.
I heard a really good example of this. Somebody was sharing with me another person's opinion of why there's a parable, or why Jesus spoke in parables. And their argument was that Jesus spoke in parables to bring people together in community, because he'd get done speaking, and as he walked away, everybody would turn to each other and be like, did you understand what he said? No, now, did you understand what he said? And ask each other questions. So now they have to be in community with one another. And I was like, I feel that way after this week, that all of us are kind of in that space where it's like, wait, do you know what that one means? I don't know if I know what that one means.
Even when Jesus explained them the last 2 weeks, they weren't clear.
Right?
This week, he doesn't even do us the good of explaining them to us. This week, he just drops us and says, here you go, friends. Here are these parables. I'm going to get off the boat now.
Right? Here's some phrases. You guys figure out what it means.
Right? Because we have to remember Jesus is preaching from a boat here, because there are so many people on the shoreline that he got shoved into a boat. Which honestly, after spending a week on a lake, which is, as you can probably see, I'm really sunburned. You can tell I just spent a week on the lake because I am sunburned. But I can see how that would be nice, because then you have like your own preaching space. It's kind of like when I preach outside, and you know, when we have outdoor worship, we have a couple of really big shade trees, and that's where everyone sits under. And I'm in direct sunlight, so no one sits by me.
Trudy, I experience this every Sunday because nobody sits in the front pews.
Yeah, not here either. It's okay.
It's all good. It's all good.
Right?
So is there anything that catches your attention or strikes your imagination?
You know, as we were reading this, there was two like weird things that came to mind. And I'm gonna say, I'm prefacing this with this is weird.
Okay.
When you started reading and it says the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field which someone found and hid, and then in his joy goes and sells all that he has and buys the field again. That reminded me, so when I first moved to Nebraska, I was taken to Nissen Winery, which is where they have the outlaw wines, where each wine is named after an outlaw. And Jesse James, I think it was, raided a train full of gold from, I want to say, Wells Fargo. And they found some, like it was him and three of his buddies, and they split it in thirds, and then they hid it in a field, and they found a jar of it recently. And it has been in this field for, 100 years, and it has 100 years worth of fertilizer and, whatever else ends up on the field on these coins. And so now they're working on cleaning them. I want to say University of Nebraska, I think is what the lady told me. Told you it was really random. But an interesting connection to here, because that was all found in this area, because Nissen Winery is in Hardington, and I think they found that over near, it wasn't far from there, I want to say. And that's pretty close to where I am. And so, pretty like weird, interesting ties to history around here, and how all that works. I don't know how that connects back to the story, but that was the thing that popped into my brain I'm weird. I'm sorry. I don't know where I was going with that.
I heard the fact that somebody actually did bury their treasure in a field. So maybe
yes.
that was a practice that was done. That it wouldn't have been unheard of to bury treasure out in a field. Like, I can't imagine today, like, burying something out in my backyard, but maybe. I mean.
Well, and I think that this is like before like people like trusted banking systems.
True.
Like we put a lot of trust in banking systems.
Yes.
I mean that's because they're well established and like we understand how they work, but when they were first being done, I'm guessing that people did probably hide their valuables that way. I don't know. Obviously this outlaw did. And we're not sure which one it was, but because they didn't recover any of it.
Wow.
Until like the last like 5 years or something like that, when that one was recovered. But I said I had two things. The other one makes way more sense and actually ties back to this.
Awesome. Let's do it.
The parable of the yeast. I like to make bread.
Yep.
The week before, I was making bread because I had gotten honey from one of my members, because I don't know if you knew this, but Randolph is the honey capital of the nation because we have more beekeepers per capita than any place else in the United States. So we are the honey capital of the nation. You're welcome. More knowledge I'll just drop on you. And so I got this big jar of honey from a parishioner, and I'm like, I'm going to make honey whole wheat bread. And when you start making bread, the first thing you do is you put your yeast in a little bowl. And I don't, because it's normally like a cup of water and a couple of teaspoons of yeast. And so I put that in my little, I had like a cup and a half bowl. And I put that in there. And pretty soon, like my yeast, I had just bought a brand new big thing of yeast. and it was like bubbling over. Like I had like yeast, because it foams. So I had like yeast foaming over and onto my countertops, because I decided to take that time, because you're supposed to let it sit for like 5 minutes, to gather the rest of my ingredients and kind of measure them out so that I could just throw it all together. And it was very hungry yeast. And to connect it back to the kingdom of God, 2 tablespoons of yeast somehow took over my entire countertop. Because it just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies, and if you have really healthy, good yeast, your bread will like really poof up. And you'll have like, that's how you get like the really soft bread, is because there's lots of air bubbles in it, and it kind of poofs up. And what a beautiful metaphor for the kingdom of heaven, because it's just like this thing that ever grows to include more and more and more and more and more.
Right.
And the more that you feed the yeast, the bigger it'll grow.
And to some degree, you have little control over it. Like as
none.
you feed, right? Like none. You, I mean, you can
like,
feed it, and you can, but at the same time, you don't get to control how it reacts, or how much it grows, or how invasive it might end up being, if you will. And yeah. I also like the fact that there's like 4 or 5 different examples. So if you're a fisherman, we're going to talk about fish. And if you're a baker, we're going to talk about baking. And if you're, a guy who, farms, we're going to talk about farming. And all of these are trying to make real something that you can't see, something that doesn't necessarily make sense, something that you find hope in, even when you have no idea what it looks like. And the question I kept coming back to, other than all of them saying, yes, they understood, because I agree with you, I just think that's a lie. They're like, looking around, they're like, we're going to nod our heads at this. Yeah, we're going to nod. Are we all nodding? We're all nodding? Okay, yeah, we're nodding. And then they probably went home and were like, did you understand a word about what he said? No. Let's talk about what the kingdom is. And then the other thing is what would it look like for you to pick one thing that is so important, so that you would sell and give up everything else? Like that idea that like, what is one thing? And I don't know that many of us could think of something that they would give everything else up for. I mean, I think that's one of the questions I have for today is if you could find one thing that you would give everything up for, what would that one thing be? And then to even go as far as to ask yourself, what's the one thing you might be taking for granted in the first place? Because it may not be a thing. Maybe the one, I tend to think that this is talking about love. That the kingdom of heaven is about love. And we would, I mean, if there was one thing we would give something up for, that might be it. So those are some of the things that these strike up in my head that challenge me to think about the fact that, God really does want as many people as possible to hear and understand. And so he gives many different examples.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right with that. What is the kingdom of heaven like? That really what it's all is boiling down to is love. And I think we've been hearing that the last couple of weeks with the parable of the sower and the parable of the weeds among wheat. And now these other parables, and that one about the field, really what it, it's that one thing that you would give everything up for. And for this guy, it was to be able to buy the field, because that's where he wants a home and family and love. And like, I get that.
Yep.
I guess.
Yep.
And we also, like, we are people who love a good romance story, right? And like, we love to hear about how much people would give up for love. So I think that makes it a little bit more relatable. I've also heard people call the kingdom a kingdom, as a way, because as Americans, we don't understand monarchies, right, and kingships and lordships, and so like those kinds of things we don't understand, but we do understand kinship. We do understand how strong family ties can be. And so I've seen kingdom replaced with kingdom, K-I-N, as in kin. In case I don't know if sometimes I speak too fast and I don't even understand what I'm saying. So I wanted to make that clear. But kingdom makes more sense because it is all about love, and it's about spreading God's love, and how like God's love is like this invasive thing that sometimes we want and sometimes we don't want. But yet it still comes and it still grows within us. As we heard with the parable of the sower, like, doesn't matter what kind of ground we are, the word is still going to come. Or like the yeast, where it might go all over your countertop. Like, that love just goes everywhere, even where it's not meant to go.
Right.
Or where we think it's not meant to go. Maybe that's a better way of saying that.
Right. Well, because there is a reminder at the end that it's angels and God who, in essence, will determine what judgment looks like. And judgment is a really weird, hard word in our culture and in our world, because when we talk about judgment, we have to talk about it from the perspective of the gospel writer. What was Matthew saying about judgment? Why was judgment important? And then a reminder that not only do we not get to judge, other people don't either. And you can't just rest on the fact that judgment is going to happen. Like, I really do think that grace is not grace until it really pisses you off.
Yes.
Because it's not just about other people either. It's like this gift and this promise that we're given changes you. And so then the struggle is if you don't feel changed, do you really feel what that love looks like in the first place? And then there's a question of, what does that love actually mean for your life? And it makes me think of in one of my psych courses in undergrad, we had to read a study about the how touch affects little ones. And the study was actually done with monkeys, but the reality is to even have brain development as children, we have to have touch. We have to have love. We have to have like this care, being cared for. Otherwise, we won't actually develop right. We won't get past certain points and our brains stop growing, stop doing what they're supposed to be doing. And some of this has been found just by people who have abandoned babies or situations that happened that they've seen, that the children in essence die because they've been given no love. And so when we take that into consideration with all of the things we know about what God talks about with love and how love affects our world, we know that to not have love is to be a sort of death. And I'd say that sometimes we call that depression or, separation from people. And that is not to minimize mental health things or to think that you can fix that on your own. But that's why we have therapists and people who are helping clear that up so that you can address those things and be in community with someone. Because we are community people. And if we're not in community, somehow we're dying. And we've just shown that to be true many times over.
Well, and I think that even in this pandemic, we're showing that to be true. I mean, if you look at the death rate in the nursing homes right now, because they haven't been able to have contact with their family members. The will to live has been greatly diminished.
Very much.
And honestly, I think that's why a lot of us right now are struggling, is because we haven't been able to have that personal contact because of this pandemic. And so we're struggling. We're struggling because we don't want to follow the rules anymore, because there just comes a point where we need love and affection, and we're willing to have it risk assessment, like what's more important to me, having personal contact or catching a virus. Like, and I get the virus is super, super deadly, and it's related to the SARS virus, so it's a very hard, impactful, but when we're not seeing immediately in front of us how it's affecting people, because I think your area is very similar to like my area, where we don't have very many people who have had it, and so we haven't seen how hard the effects can be, and so we're kind of rebelling. And I'm speaking for myself as well. Like, I haven't been following the rules as well as I probably should be, especially more recently, because there's just come a point where I'm like, you know what? I need my family. And so.
Yeah. So as you think about the parable, as you go throughout the rest of your week, and as we head towards Sunday, I know that we just have to talk about what does this love look like, and how does the kingdom or the world that God is putting forth in Jesus Christ look. A God who understands what it means to suffer, to be abandoned, to not have people support him, or any of those things. Like that's what is being spoken into right now, is the fact that God knows the end of the story just like we do, right? And so when we talk about something being so important that you would sell all your other possessions and all your other things and give up everything else, I think the only answer could be love, to some degree. And so I know that from this corner of my world, I love all of you. And during this pandemic, I definitely miss most all of you. I could be honest and say most of you. But thank you for joining us. I'm Pastor Cara.
And I'm Pastor Trudy. We'll see you next week.
Yep, we hope you have a great day.